Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH, and today we are looking at Phage the Untouchable. So a little bit of a preamble on this one. So if you recall, recently I did a video called Commanders I Won't Make Videos On, and in there I included a talk about how I wouldn't make a video on Phage or any of the Myogens because these cards specifically are designed to basically not work in Commander because they were made before Commander was a format. So in the case of Phage, it is when Phage enters the battlefield, if you didn't cast it from your hand, you lose the game. So obviously, there are ways around this, but this essentially doesn't work as a commander. However, I got a lot of pushback in that video, and so the number one comment I received was about Phage. So just to highlight some of them, it's a bit sad to hear you dismiss Phage. I am the owner of a Phage deck and totally agree. There are a lot of cards that prevent losing on Phage cast or put into your hand from the command zone, so it's totally playable. Honestly, I do want to make a Phage the Untouchable deck someday, playing all the most spike cards imaginable, like all the you can't lose the game liches, life exchanging, etc. I know Phage is dumb, but her decks are so funny and goofy. And of course, the ever popular Phage is a unique deck, bruh. So I can admit when I'm wrong, and Phage is actually kind of interesting, so I went ahead and built myself a Phage deck here, and that's what we'll be highlighting today. So Phage the Untouchable, as I said, is a 7 mana black commander with quadruple black pips. She's a 4/4 legendary creature avatar minion. There was some type changing shenanigans afoot, so she was initially printed in her original printing. So in original printing, she's listed as a minion legend, then in 10th edition, a minion. And then in Conspiracy, which is the most recent printing outside of the Secret Lair printing, she's an avatar minion, although at one point she was errated to include the zombie type line. However, that was never actually printed on a card, meaning the word zombie never actually appeared on any Phage the Untouchable card. So she was then errated back into not being a zombie, so that's where we are at now. But anyways, so Phage has the ability, when Phage enters the battlefield, if you didn't cast it from your hand, you lose the game. So obviously this is a pretty big hurdle to jump through. I'll get back to that in a moment. She also has whenever Phage deals combat damage to a creature, destroy that creature, it can't be regenerated, which is basically just a delayed death touch. And then the reason to play Phage, whenever Phage deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. So the big question is, how are we going to get around this enter the battlefield, you lose restriction? Well, there's a couple of ways of doing it. You could stop the trigger from triggering or counter it. You could move her from the command zone to your hand, or you could employ some sort of other effect that prevents you from losing the game, such as literally any effect that says you can't lose the game. So before I get to the cards that we are going to play, I'm going to highlight some of the cards that we're not playing. So among the you can't lose the game effects, we have Lich's Mastery, Platinum Angel, Lich's Mirror, the Golden Throne, and Stunning Reversal. And none of these cards are going to work simply because either they're too expensive or they have too significant of downsides. So for example, Lich's Mastery, Platinum Angel are 6 and 7 mana, but even the other ones, Lich's Mirror at 5 and Golden Throne and Stunning Reversal at 4, are all pretty expensive. But there are the other downsides. So Lich's Mastery is whenever you gain life, draw that many cards. Whenever you lose life, for each one life you lost, exile a permanent. You control a card from your hand or graveyard, and when Lich's Mastery leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. So it does have hexproof, but if your opponents have any sort of sweeper or other method of getting around the hexproof, you can just lose on the spot. And the fact that whenever you lose the life, you have to exile permanents or get rid of cards in your hand is a pretty big issue. Same thing with Platinum Angel, where Platinum Angel doesn't have a downside, but Platinum Angel is an artifact creature, so all they have to do is just literally blow up Platinum Angel while you have Phage on the stack, and it's just so darn expensive at 7 mana. Lich's Mirror causes you to shuffle your hand, graveyard, and all permanents you own back into your library, and then draw 7 and life total becomes 20, so there's really no point in using this since it's just resetting your entire board. The Golden Throne and Stunning Reversal, instead of losing the game, your life total gets set to 1, which means you die to literally anything. If your opponent has any sort of burn or life drain effect, or literally a creature that you can't block, or just 2 creatures, you're gonna die. So these are too significant of downsides or too risky to employ to make any of these cards work. But with that said, there are a handful of other cards that can work, so I've put these under the category of Phage negation, or like anti-Phage cards. So we've got Campfire, Command Beacon, and Netherborn Altar that are all going to fall into the same sort of category. So Campfire, apart from having this life gain effect, has exile it, put all commanders you own from the command zone and from your graveyard into your hand, then shuffle your graveyard into your library. Command Beacon can be sacrificed to put a commander into your hand from the command zone. And Netherborn Altar gets a counter and then you put your commander into your hand, and then you lose 3 life for each soul counter on another Born Altar. So obviously you probably don't want to activate this more than one time because the life loss is going to get significantly more brutal, but losing 3 to put Phage into your hand isn't too bad, at least for the first time. And obviously all of these effects are significantly cheaper than the cards that we just looked at. There's also Sundial of the Infinite, 1 mana tap, end the turn, activate this ability only during your turn. So with Phage's trigger on the stack, you can activate this. This does require that you have an extra mana lying around. So you will have to have 8 mana to cast Phage and then activate this ability. It also is a pretty significant downside in that you can't do anything else the turn Phage comes into play. But this is a way to get around the ability. And then probably the best one is Torpor Orb. Creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. So not only is this a stacks piece against various other cards that might be an issue, like Thassa's Oracle and Dockside Extortionist, for example, but it also counters Phage's ability. Now, the biggest downside to any of these permanent-based ones like Sundial and Torpor Orb is that if your opponent has instant speed artifact removal, they can get rid of these while Phage is on the stack before she enters the battlefield, and then you're just going to lose the game. But assuming that you can either protect these or set up a situation where you know your opponent either can't interact with you or they probably don't have a spell that's going to interact with this, then these are all the cards that you can use. And then obviously the ones that put her directly into your hand are not an issue either. For me, Torpor Orb is the best one since it doesn't have any of the downsides of the other cards and is also a stacks piece. Like, it does other things. You don't have to pay any additional mana once it's already in play. But all of these can work. However, this is not that many effects for Phage, so you do want to put a priority on fetching these up. Although, again, we are in black, so we have plenty of tutors to go get them. So the next thing after that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to focus on making sure that we can hit our opponents with Phage to kill them. So obviously she has when she deals damage to an opponent, they lose. So we're going to want a couple of things. One, we're going to want ways of making Phage have haste so that we can attack immediately instead of having to pass the turn. Two, we're going to want ways to protect Phage, so we're going to want to make her uncounterable and unremovable so that we don't, spend 7 mana to cast our Phage only for her to then get killed. It's especially problematic if we used a one-off effect to get Phage into our hand, for example. So let's say we had to sack our command beacon or get rid of our campfire, and then they just kill Phage and she goes back to the command zone. Well, that's a pretty big problem because now Phage costs 9. We really want to make sure that doesn't happen. And also we can't get her back into our hand again if these are gone. So protecting her is going to be of pretty high importance. And then the last part is going to be making sure that she can actually get through. It doesn't matter if she's protected from removal and has haste, or we can attack with her if our opponent can just chump block with anything, especially since she's only a 4/4, which does put her in a range of toughness where she could potentially get killed by blockers. So we want to make sure that she's unblockable. So with that said, we've got a bunch of different cards that are going to enable this to work. So first are haste effects, of course. So this is going to be Crashing Drawbridge, Hall of the Bandit Lord, Lava Spur Boots, Lightning Greaves, and Swiftfoot Boots. And luckily, Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots also double up as ways of protecting her from removal. Although any of these cards are going to have downsides of requiring extra mana if they do. So Lava Spur Boots and Swiftfoot Boots cost 1 more to equip. So the ones that don't require this are a little bit better. Lightning Greaves, Hall of the Bandit Lord, and Crashing Drawbridge. Next is going to be protection effects. So these are going to be effects that either prevent her from getting countered, such as Cavern of Souls or Defense Grid to make our opponent's spells cost more during our turn, Imp's Mischief as a way of redirecting counter spells, or just making her immune to removal, so Commander's Plate, Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, and Whisper Silk Cloak to give her Shroud. And then finally, we're going to have unblockability. Again, we want to make sure that she can't get blocked. So we're going to have Cover of Darkness. We choose a creature type, and then creatures of the chosen type have fear. Dragon Shadow is an aura that gives fear. Additionally, it has when a creature with mana value 6 or greater enters the battlefield, you may return Dragon Shadow from your graveyard to play enchanting the creature. So if this was in our graveyard for whatever reason, or let's say we put this on Phage, then Phage gets killed and we had to replay Phage, this can just come back from our graveyard and reattach to Phage. Leshrax's Right is Swamp Walk, as is Night Haze. So if our opponents control swamp, she can just be unblockable. And even if our opponents don't have a swamp, we can just use Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth to make our opponents have a swamp. And then finally, we just have the cards that make her straight up unblockable, Wedding Invitation and Whisper Silk Cloak being those cards. And some of these cards have a little bit extra utility, like Night Haze at least cantrips, so does Wedding Invitation. Whisper Silk Cloak also makes her have Shroud. It is worth noting that the cards like Whisper Silk Cloak and Lightning Greaves giving her Shroud means that we can't then target her with other stuff like Night Haze, Leshrax, right, etc. So if this is the way that we're going to have to make her unblockable and we have Whisper Silk Cloak, we either have to cast these ahead of time, or we have to have, for example, a way to move stuff. So let's say we've got like Lightning Greaves and we need Phage to have haste. We need another creature so that we can move the Lightning Greaves to that other creature, or we need to cast this stuff first and then move the Lightning Greaves. Additionally, I've added what I'm calling these Raise Dead effects. So these are cards that bring her back from the graveyard to our hand. So specifically in this case, it's going to be Resourceful Return. Return target creature from your graveyard to your hand. If you control an artifact, draw a card. So controlling an artifact is not going to be too hard in EDH when we have probably going to have at least one Mana Rock lying around. And Dross Skull Bomb, which you can either cycle or, more importantly, pay 3, sack it, return target creature from your graveyard to your hand, draw a card, activate as a sorcery. So the reason you would want these Raise Dead effects, these effects that bring her back from your graveyard to your hand, is that you don't necessarily want to pay the commander tax, first of all. And secondly, you may not have an effect like Torpor Orb, for example, that allows us to just cast her from the command zone. And therefore, you want ways of being able to just let her go to the graveyard, not put her back in the command zone, and then just bring her back to our hand so we can cast her normally. Now, the only reason Dross Skull Bomb is in here, because it is kind of expensive, 1 mana to cast and 3 to activate, is specifically because it's fetchable off of Urza's Saga. There are obviously many more Raise Dead effects we could play, but these are the 2 that actually cycle or cantrip themselves. So these are the best ones. If you are finding yourself lacking more, you could play more. So then there's everything else in the deck. So we're going to want some card draw. So we've got Black Market Connections, which also lets us get treasure tokens. We've got Bolas' Citadel, all is good. Mindblade Render, hit our opponent and draw. Necropotence. Stinging Study, Phage is 7 mana, so we get to draw 7 off of this. The Ring. And then, of course, Throne of Eldraine. So this is more of a ramp card, though. I'll get to that later. We do have some combo stuff, so we're going to play Bolas' Citadel anyway. Easy enough to just put Aetherflux Reservoir and Sensei's Divining Top in the deck to be a side combo that we can play in case the Phage plan doesn't work out. If you're not too stoked on playing infinite combos in your deck, you can obviously just cut this. Gray Merchant. Black decks obviously lose lots of life in many ways. I mean, just right here, we've already seen Stinging Study, Necro, Mindblade, Black Market, and Bolas' Citadel, all of which cause us to lose a bunch of life, and we're going to have many more cards in the deck that do that. So just having a way to gain a bunch of life is helpful, even if the Gray Merchant doesn't necessarily kill our opponents. And then Fast Mana, and this next point is going to apply to both Fast Mana and Ramp, which is that we may need additional mana once Phage comes into play to equip Swiftfoot Boots, to cast things that are going to make her unblockable, and so on. So if we can have additional mana once we cast Phage, it's always going to be helpful, which is a little bit challenging because Phage is 7 mana, but this is a way to do that. So Cabal Ritual, Dark Ritual, Jeweled Lotus, these are all good ways of having some additional mana lying around. Obviously, we could play some more like Lotus Petal or whatnot, but I figured these are the best ones in terms of getting more than we're paying for them. Lands, pretty straightforward. It's all the ones you would expect. Obviously, Urborg is going to have a little bit more utility here because we want our opponents to have swamps so that we can give Phage Swamp Walk. Shizo is also a land that allows our Phage to gain fear. Takanuma is specifically going to be good because, again, we want to make sure that Phage doesn't just have to go back to the command zone, that we can fetch her back from our graveyard to your hand if necessary. Haul the Bandit Lord for haste, as we mentioned earlier. Cabal Coffers, we're playing Urborg anyway. This seems simple enough. Cavern for protection. Ancient Tomb. The Black Gate is a land that, it's one of those lands that enters tapped unless we pay 3 life, and it says 1 black, choose a player with the most life or tied for most life. Target creature can't be blocked by creatures that player controls this turn. So this is another way of making Phage unblockable under certain circumstances, although not always. And then Vault of Whispers is in here just so that we have another artifact for Mox Opal. Additionally, you may wonder, why are there fetch lands if we're a mono black deck? And there are fetch lands for 2 reasons, or 3 reasons rather. One is for Bolas' Citadel and Sensei's Divining Top to manipulate the top card of our deck. And then another is to get Revolt for Fatal Push. Got our suite of ramp cards. This is pretty straightforward. I'll highlight some of the more unconventional ones. Heartless Summoning to make Phage cost 2 less, and we don't care if Phage is a 3/3. because all we care about is hitting our opponents and making Phage unblockable anyway. If for whatever reason your local metagame is playing a bunch of bolt effects, I guess this might come up as an issue, but otherwise it's fine. Crick, home of one of the best black EDH decks, is also in here because Crick is a way to make Phage only cost 3 generic mana and then you just pay a bunch of life for the rest of her. The keys are typically played as ways of making things like Mana Vault or the Ring untap for more value, but in here specifically, Manifold Key allows our creature to once again be unblockable. Same thing with Sonic Screwdriver as another way, so these have additional utility with Phage. Some removal spells, because, we need some removal spells. These also double up as a way to potentially clear blockers out of the way if our opponents don't have that many creatures. And then finally, some stacks effects that are not really going to affect us too much, so things like Curse Totem, Dothy, Opposition Agent. Shieldred is in here also because of the life gain, which really does matter when you're playing these black decks that have so many cards that lose life. And then some sweepers, which again, we can deploy these either as just normal sweepers for whatever we need them for, or we can deploy them before Phage gets cast to clear the board and then cast Phage next turn, or if we have a bunch of more mana. So Damnation, Toxic Deluge are the best black sweepers, so we're playing those. And then of course, tutors, Demonic, Imperial Seal, Tainted Pact, Vamp Tutor. And yep, that is pretty much going to do it for Phage the Untouchable in EDH.